Interview with Otto A. Kern of 180 Cinnabar in Williamston, Michigan, 48895. Otto's phone number is area code 517-655-1765. The interview was conducted on April 28, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing, Michigan. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Okay, Otto, maybe you could start with your name and your address and phone number, if you would, for me.
Otto Andrew Kern,
Okay.
and it's 180 Cinnabar, Williamston, Michigan. It's 48895. Telephone number is 655-1765. We've lived out there now for about 15 years, and we plan to continue living out there because we like the Lansing area.
Okay. So you're going to stay there in retirement?
Yes.
For now.
Our roots are kind of deep here in Lansing. I've been with Oldsmobile General Motors 38 years.
Okay.
And all that time, except for the last 5, was in product engineering, as you well know. And so our roots are deep. We have a family, our friends, a church, Michigan State with all of its sports and concerts and all that. So we continue to enjoy that and plan to after we retire also.
Okay. When did you start then at the plant, Otto?
Right after I graduated from Michigan State in 1955. But I started at Fisher Body in Lansing.
Oh.
I had worked 3 summers there, not as a co-op, but as a guy on the line for the 3 summers as I went through Michigan State, and then was able to get a job in their industrial engineering department there at Fisher Body in Lansing.
Oh, so you actually went to the Fisher side of the house in
First, yes. And that was a good experience for me. Because then after I was at Fisher for just a few months, 9 months, something like that, I had an obligation with the ROTC at Michigan State, so I had to go into service. And originally I had been signed up for a 2-year obligation in the active Army, but because of the Korean War winding down, they had all the lieutenants they needed, and so I was only in for 6 months. But when I came back out of the service after the 6 months, I didn't go back to Fisher Body. I thought I wanted to be with a car producing company like Oldsmobile, and John Belts, and I don't remember what his job was at that time, but I think he was experimental engineer, but he's the guy that hired me. And I started in the lab and was in the electrical lab there in product engineering.
And this would have been about
1956.
Oh.
Because I was what they called at that time a detail project engineer when I got back out of the service in 56.
Okay.
That was September. And then I was in the lab for about 2 years. Okay. I had a very interesting assignment in the lab. After some initial electrical work, I was assigned the responsibility of testing the air ride compressors. You may not recall, but we had an air ride program. And at that time in the laboratory, I recall this vividly, you had to wear long-sleeved white shirts with a tie. Really? We were not allowed to wear shop coats at that time. And these compressors, as I recall, I had something like 4 per engine running on, as the engine as a slave to run the compressors. And some would last about 2 hours, another one maybe 7 hours. They'd blow oil all over. And I went through white shirts like they were butter, you know. But that was really an interesting project because we were testing a Delco compressor, a Saginaw compressor, and even an AC electric compressor at that time.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And the mechanical ones won out, Delco and Saginaw. And ironically, the best compressor didn't get the job. It seems that Saginaw had an empty plant or Delco, one of the two, and they ended up getting the business. And the valves were the problem. They were burning out the valves all the time. And
is that what caused them to blow?
Yes. But that was a neat project. And then
think about that project a little bit. That one had a lot of other ramifications. Did you get involved with any of the other things that happened with the air ride thing?
Like what?
I remember people having problems in parking lots with them sitting on the ground.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. But see, I was in the lab at that time, and the project engineers that had the project responsibility were in the chassis group, and I was merely a tester in the lab of the compressor. There were all kinds of wheel valves and other things, airbags, plumbing nightmare, exactly. But they sat in their haunches in parking lots a lot because they would leak down, but they would pump up quickly. And in the end, there was a special policy, and anybody that had an air ride suspension cars, if they bring it into their dealership, we would put a conventional suspension under it because they were failing so badly, either the compressors, the wheel valves, or the airbags. And there was even at that time a ozone problem, as I recall, with the rubber in the airbag. All kinds of. Yes, yes.
Do you know, was it other than Oldsmobile project?
No, that was purely Oldsmobile. Now, there have been other air ride systems over the years, but that was one of the first significant ones. And it was a good program. It just, there were so many engineering problems that design-wise they couldn't get themselves out of. They didn't know how to make a better reed valve for the compressor or a better wheel valve at that time. And but it was a fun project, and I always remember that going through the white shirts like butter. And Mama like that. Yes, yeah. But after that, I was in the body group. I moved up and worked for George Ritz, and again, that was an interesting experience because George had the body group responsibility at that time for ride development on the car, how soft it was and how it moved back and forth. And so Bob Schultz and I were the two guys that worked for George Ritz on ride and handling and structure in the automobile. And again, that was an exciting learning thing for both Bob and I because we went out to grounds and rode cars and put cars on shakers and even had pickups that we measured velocities of the movement of the fender dynamically as we went down the road. Did we have kind of a goal for a ride? Oldsmobile had a kind of ride they wanted to promote. So yes, they did indeed. And it was work between the chassis group and product engineering and the body group, which Bob and I were part of. The goal was to have an extremely soft, what we called highway ride. As you're going down a relatively smooth road, it had to be plushy and smooth, free of vibration. But then the other end of the criteria is going over a rough road. And while some cars like Chevrolets and Pontiacs are typically stiffer and go over those much harder, Oldsmobile's goal is always to be a prestige feeling car over even the rough roads. And that isn't always a good, easy compromise to make it super soft and yet enjoyable, soft at the rough road area. But those were kind of the goals of the managers that we were trying to promote. Yes. The John Beltzes and Metzels of the world wanted that kind of car in their to be sold to their customers. And for a long time, it was even kind of referred to as the Oldsmobile ride. It was something that people knew that we were softer and felt better and didn't waddle and shake around, and you didn't get tired on long trips because your back was sore from the waddling or moving about. So it was a thing that the sales department even used as sales criteria for selling to customers. This is the Oldsmobile ride, and it worked out nicely. Did it take, Otto, I'm interrupting a little bit, but did that take a lot of significant amount of engineering time to create that sort of thing? How did you go about doing that? Well, it was much less sophisticated than they do now. Most of it was by the seat of the pants. You'd make a body mount change, either in the durometer or the rate of the mount or the size of it, making it square or thicker or rounder or whatever. Sometimes it was the valving in the shock absorber or the rate of the spring or combinations of all those things, even the rates of the rubber parts in the suspension and the control arms, the bushings affected how what kind of a ride you had and what kind of jounce and rebound that you had, how quick it was or how soft it was or how you went over hills and valleys. And most of that was trial and error? Yes, it was. most of it was trial and error. There were a lot of things that we could do to affect the structure of the car just by putting them on static shakers. You could put a shaker on a bumper or a frame and make it move. And we even had what we thought at the time was a sophisticated shaker on a rolls there in product engineering, so that you could simulate rough road while sitting on this roll in the engineering department. And you learned a lot about the structure of the car. And again, you didn't want the thing to be a rigid rail structure. You wanted to be able to flex, and you didn't want it to be shaking and vibrating. And so there was always a compromise between good structure, ride, softness, feel.
A lot of trade-offs.
A lot of trade-offs, and many, many miles of riding and riding and riding, and to get the feel of the car, and to bring all these variables together to make it a sound car, because you didn't want it to be shaky, you didn't want it to be too stiff, and there were all kinds of, I want to call them tricks, but there were little things that, even how we attached the fenders to the body. Sometimes you would put a masonite type shim in there just to absorb some of the vibration, and sometimes you'd have different ways of rates, even on the transmission and the engine mounts. Obviously, you got a big mass jumping up and down there when you have that engine and transmission, and so those rates of those mounts, and what kind of mounts, and the shear rates of those mounts. Well, it goes on and on. But anyway, everything was a compromise, and I don't want to say a compromise from the negative standpoint. You brought all these things together so that you have a pleasant car.
Trying to accomplish these objectives.
Yes, yes.
Did the managers then, like the general managers, how did they agree or approve, so to speak, what you got here?
About every other week, the chassis engineer, who was Ralph Perkins for most of that time, and George Ritz, who was our boss in the body group, would get together and they'd ride the cars and say, "Gee, guys, that's nice, but I'm moving about too much." Or when I went over that stretch over there, I saw the fender moving a little bit, and I don't think that's right. And then maybe once every other month, it depended on the situation, the chief engineer, John Belts or a Metzel or even a Wolfram at that time, would come out and ride the car. And usually that would occur in Phoenix because it was wintertime here when we were working the car for the next year. It isn't like we do it today where you need to have, 2 years in advance. Today's system is better, but I don't want to negate that at all, because we did things at the last minute that you guys in manufacturing couldn't accomplish. And it was a sad state of affair when we did stuff like that, but that's the way we did it at that time, But anyway, the managers would come out and ride the cars and say, "Gee, that's all right." And we'd always have comparison cars, our last year's cars, or a Chrysler or a Ford.
Would you have several optional, like current or proposed models that would be, this is what we can do, this, or this, and people would?
Sometimes. But generally, you worked a couple of cars and put the same package in both of them.
Okay.
And they'd typically be out there for a week, and they'd ride up to Flagstaff and back on the highways, and then we'd have a route on secondary roads, and they might decide, "Gee, that's pretty good, but I'd like to just be a little softer," and we go back to work. And then another couple of months, they'd or months, whatever it took, they'd come back and ride the cars. That was a big part of making a pleasant car. Right along with that, and I don't want to minimize the importance of this, when you did these either structural changes or mount changes or whatever, you want to be very careful, because you didn't want to introduce squeaks and rattles and unpleasant noises, even engine noises.
The other side of the coin.
Yeah, but to make a totally pleasant car, you can't just ride soft. It's got to be quiet and don't bring a lot of road noise in. So at the same time you were perfecting the car from a ride, handling, and feel standpoint, you were putting maybe an insulation patch over here someplace, or deadener over the whole floor, or things of that nature, so that you'd have a totally pleasant car. And those were fun times, because you really I say fun because a lot of it was seat of the pants, but they do a lot of the same stuff yet today, even with the sophistication of all the.
Well, it's background and knowledge.
Yes, it is.
People have done this. So
Yes,
they understand.
yeah, exactly.
Well, what about writers? Writers were always writing articles and writing cars and all that stuff.
They typically liked the Oldsmobile because we were a good feeling car, whether it be on the expressway or secondary roads. And writers wrote a lot about our Oldsmobile ride, as they called it.
Okay. Did you ever listen to them when a guy would say, well,
yes and no.
Or I don't like that, or I like this, or I don't.
Yes and no. Obviously, we listened to our general manager or chief engineer more, but the writers typically, and still today, are more gung-ho on the flashy, sporty car, and they are typically firmer, harder, just because of the things that they do. They're not a family car, they're not a handling car typically, and so we took what they said with a grain of salt. We read what they said, and if we had a 442, we listened to them and put some of that stuff into a 442 or whatever, you know.
Okay.
Another interesting project that I had in the body group that I recall is and you were probably involved with this when we at Oldsmobile came out with the first plastic filler plate. And up till that time, they were obviously stampings of steel. And Oldsmobile, it was a project I worked on for 2 years. In fact, it gave an SAE paper on it.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Okay. Go find that.
We had all kinds of test plastics, polyethylene and polypropylene and all kinds of generic in-between stuff. And we tested them, you know, for flammability and for crashability. Nobody had molded a plastic part that large at that time. And our initial tests, in fact, were 2 halves of the filler plate kind of bolted together of plastic.
Oh, really?
Yes. Right. We mentioned earlier the red filler plate. Well, that's pretty easy to do. All you do is put in red plastic and come out with red filler plates, but it hadn't been done before, you know, and Oldsmobile was the first on that with the 442. That was an exciting project too, because you can imagine there were a lot of different chemical outfits that wanted their plastic to be the one that made that was big business, the poundage that we put into each car in plastic.
But this was an all new thing. We never tried, nobody ever fiddled around with this.
Nobody had done it before, right? And became very successful. But here again, in the past, when you had steel filler plates, it kind of was, not kind of, it was a part of the structure of the front sheet metal.
Sure.
And all of a sudden you put kind of a wet noodle in there and you have different structures. So you had to design your fender tie bar or whatever they called that at that time, even the fender in different ways than you did with steel. And it was kind of an important part of it because you didn't want those fenders sitting out there flopping. And
you remember some of the things that were maybe some of the, what I'll call, quote, problems related to that creation?
Yeah, one was flammability. Some of the polyethylene burned so easily that every time you'd have a little oil fire under the hood, you blew the whole filler plates because they just went up in smoke very quickly. And so we had some formulations of plastics that had higher flash points, wouldn't ignite very easily, and that's what we finally ended up. One of the advantages, obviously, was weight savings. That wasn't as significant as it is today, but the other part of it was that it didn't rust, and that was in typically a very vulnerable area. All kinds of stones throw up on the filler plate, and those filler plates typically rusted out first, right along with the rocker panels. And when we went to plastic, of course, we solved those kind of problems. Were you actually involved? I know Larry Lennon was with the initial molding of the.
Lennon was the guy on the plastics.
Yeah, and that was a new endeavor for him. Our plant, the manufacturing of these filler plates, that's a big piece of plastic, and how you cooled it and how you built the molds. There was a lot of first-time engineering stuff that Lennon's people were involved with to make those filler plates. Now he made all kinds of plastics after that, but. Yes. That brings up another kind of interesting story that I was involved with. and gave an SAE paper on this also. We at Oldsmobile produced the first chrome-plated plastic grill. You may recall that way back when. It seems simple today, and it's used every day, but back then, nobody had used a plastic grill chrome-plated. There was always a die casting of some kind of configuration, and again, weight savings and...
Is that what we were striving for at that point?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We were into that crunch.
Yep. So that was an interesting project also to see, do you get the right plastic? You had different problems with the grill because you have birds that might fly into it and damage it. So we actually tested out of proving grounds. We hung a fishpole over the bridge and had the car run into a simulated bird
I'll be darned. No.
to see what. And then we had some drop tests we ran. But you have to worry about stuff like that because you didn't want grill bars to be breaking out easily or even breaking out when you wash the car. So again, it was a different type of plastic than we use in the filler plates because you had to have a particular base chemical that would, not base chemical, but the base plastic had to be chemically able to match up with the base of the chrome plating so that it wasn't just an encapsulation.
Right.
It was a chemical reaction. Yes, it was. And when we gave our first SAE paper on that at Cobo Hall, it was kind of interesting because the Japanese weren't where they were today, and they were taking all kinds of pictures of the chrome. They bought my paper and all that kind of stuff.
That's interesting.
And they went back and obviously are using it. Everybody in the world is using it today. But another kind of interesting thing I did, I was able to obtain a patent. This was just about at the time when the motor vehicle safety standards came in, and you had to have bumpers that collapsed and would pass a 5-mile-per-hour test, and hoods that wouldn't go into the windshield but had to go down. Well, I came up with a hinge configuration that still being used today, that as you bend the hood and it collapses in this kind of fashion, typically the hinges just let the rear end go anyplace, and that wasn't allowable because you can't go into this prime A area where people's head hit. And so I came up with a hinge device that as this occurred, the back end of the hood actually tightened down tighter, and it was a little hooking device, and it was pretty simple, but it worked very well.
So it kind of pulled it down into the...
Well, forced it down. The more pressure that was exerted, the harder it was pulled down, and it was kind of a neat little thing.
I know you commented a little bit about what I'll call the Japanese. In those earlier days in the early 50s and the 60s, or late 50s and 60s, how was that perceived at that point in time?
The Japanese?
Yeah, the foreign competition thing.
Well, we in fact didn't even consider them competition. They weren't selling a great number of cars in the United States at that time. It really didn't come, we didn't think of them as competition until about the 70s. And initially, we snickered at their cars because they weren't very good, and they knew they weren't very good also, but they very quickly became strong competitors and quality automobiles. Interestingly, though, Jim, is that the Japanese didn't innovate very much at all. They copied a lot. Nothing wrong with that, except that they, when they copied, they made sure that they did it right quality-wise and foolproof as much as they could, so that the employee on the line couldn't screw it up. You only could put it on one way. And
was any of that obvious at all? Some of the cars you used to have been driving out at the...
Oh, yeah. We used many of the cars for...
In days, could you see any of that stuff coming at you?
No,
it just didn't show up.
No, it did not. Many people think and thought that the Japanese were just engineering their hearts out, doing all this neat stuff, but they weren't really. They were copying many of our American-made cars.
Chrome plating.
Yes, same thing. They didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They didn't do it, but even plastic filler plates, or now we have plastic fenders, as you well know, and other people will be using those too. Now the Japanese just did a good job after their initial thrust at cars, and we used them then as competition. I mean, when we had a ride, we'd take one of their cars along as a comparative car, and they were that good that we could.
This is in later years.
Yes, later years. I mentioned earlier that I've been with Oldsmobile for 38 years. All but 5 of that was in product engineering, and I was fortunate to have interesting jobs and fun jobs, and I still enjoy my job. And I think if more people enjoyed their job, we wouldn't have the troubles we have in some areas. But I was fortunate. I was in the body group, I was in chassis group, I was in the experimental area. And, you know, you and I worked together on some projects. And unfortunately, Jim, in the old days in engineering was kind of aloof. And we in engineering sometimes told the sales department what they were going to sell. We told manufacturing what they were going to manufacture. And unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of communication that they do today. They should have had then. I know Jim Kessel spent a lot of time over there just on bumpers. The styling and us guys would come up with these neat curves on bumpers and everything. And Jim Kessel just physically couldn't make that kind of a radius in that kind of area. And so we had to start compromising, and it was good because we pulled in the manufacturing people that needed to be pulled in. I know you were involved with a lot of this early stuff, and we engineered better cars because we were in tune with the manufacturing people and with the salespeople that really have to sell the cars.
When did that sort of start to happen? Can you sort of see that somewhere in a continuum of time?
Well, I'm laying it to the early 80s, like
that late.
That late.
Okay.
Before that, we'd have design reviews, but the designs were pretty well solidified, and that was unfortunate. I think
But like, see, the people working with you on the plastics business, they must have been working hand in glove with you.
Yes, they were. Larry Lennon, Ron Ortasiak, Ray Witter was involved with it.
So in essence,
it was before 1980 then. Yeah,
they were sort of in the 70s.
Yep, it was. Yep.
But maybe it wasn't more on just sort of specific new things like that?
Yeah, it was. Yes, it was. And that's what I wanted to say a little bit about. The entire automobile was styled without much input from sales department and or manufacturing area. And what the Wolframs and the Metzels and Beltzes of the world thought was neat, that's what happened, you know. And on the other hand, you don't want to stifle the creativity of stylists and designers. Sometimes, because of some of the things we did, for instance, Jimmy Kessel, he found ways to make tighter radius. He innovated, you know, and exactly. That's what I want to say. And so it was good from that standpoint. And I guess another project that I was involved with, Bob Schultz was my boss at that time, but was of course, the '66 Tornado. That was a fun car to work on, right from the drawing board up. And again, we were working ride and handling at that time on the Tornado, and that was a new thing, a torsion bar suspension. Stemple designed the torsion bar suspension, by the way. He was on the chassis boards at that time. And he affectionately got called after that, Bob, John Beltz's bagman, because when John Beltz went out around to see the dealers, Stemple would come with him because he's the guy that knew all about the front suspension, and that started him on his climb, I think, really, because that car was John Beltz's baby, of course. Even though Metzel was a general manager, Beltz was a chief engineer at that time when that car came out. Well,
where that idea sort of came from?
No, I don't. I wasn't in the chassis group at that time. I was in the body group, but it must have been a committee decision or a group decision to say, hey, we don't have room here for conventional springs. What else can we do? And then they came up with this torsion bar configuration. And that had to be a nightmare too, because you never designed one of these. What kind of steel do you use? And it was a high alloy steel, a spring steel. And what kind of rates do you give it? How much does it turn? And that had to be really a wild design thing. And when you think about designing a whole car like that, rather manually with drawing on aluminum drafts, and today, of course, you wouldn't think of doing that. You got the computer and then computerized drafting machines and all kinds of neat ways.
Okay.
Well, I was finishing up telling about the body surfaces on the outside of the Tornado. They were all manually done by the old Schmidt system of laying out the surface. Well, today they can do that same fender design-wise on the surface probably in a day or two at the most, and it would take us months to do that on one fender.
And if you made a change all over again.
All over again, yeah. And that happened sometimes because when you really did the surface by the old method, sometimes you got some funny highlights and you had to change some stuff. And different era. What really changed engineering design and the speed of the design was the computerized drafting, of course. That was a big step in design engineering.
When did that sort of start to
Boy,
filter in?
I'm looking at my dates of different jobs, so probably 1970s, something like that. I was crude when it first started, but it evolved into a real sophisticated thing quickly.
What were you doing when the Tornado was coming along, Otto? What was your part of that?
Well, I had the crashability of it for one thing.
Okay.
How well it withstood both frontal and rear crashes. Now, there weren't any federal requirements at that time, but you still wanted to test it to see how well it would perform. Well, you can imagine it was hard to be given a car and then destroy it, by crashing it. So sometimes that work was done at the tail end rather than at the front end where it should have. But you still have to make some changes because of crashability. The other thing is that it had a rather unique flow-through ventilation system that we worked on also.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the louvers in the back.
Yep. And that worked out very well.
When you were doing all that, did it do kind of as we thought it would?
Yes. Yeah, it did.
Compression stuff.
Now, we had some problems with water separation. Those neat louvers look nice when the air goes out, but rain goes in them also. So we had to find out the ways to you design the ways to drain the water off and let it come out underneath the car rather than inside. And of course, then you have to worry about sealing of the metals that are welded together back there.
Did the Tornado, did they try and achieve a different kind of ride and handling, so to speak?
Yes. And you may recall that the 1966 was a typical sporty car ride. It was very stiff, very boxy. Now in the years after that, after the first car, we evolved to a much softer Tornado. And it was much more pleasant to ride. But the model 1966 was not a pleasant car to ride and handle. It was stiff. It was boxy. It went like that rather than, and that's what the image wanted at that time. See, in this kind of a prestige, big car, powerful car, that had the big 455 engine in it, and it really moved. But
so that must have been what Belts was trying, or somebody was trying to achieve with that.
Oh yeah, exactly. He wanted it that way, and we slowly evolved over the next several years into a much softer ride, and finally, even with the first body style, we had a very, very pleasant ride. It was still powerful feeling, and they even had a special exhaust system the first year that was noisier than the typical exhaust system. They wanted the sound of power. When you step on it, you don't want to just go; you want to hear it too. So, a different feel on the car that John and Messa wanted at that time to to make it sound, feel, act like a sporty car. And you remember it was a big, compared to today's car, it was a big tank, you know, but I was just reading on the news release, we're not going to have it, of course, for 1993. That first year, we sold like,
we sold a bunch.
I was thinking 30,000, but the second year we sold like 50,000. It was a
like
significant jump, and even the third. Yes, yes. It went chunk because after that first and the second revision wasn't bad either, but the third one, it was made, the present one was made smaller, and the people that were buying Tornados they were bigger people, older people, and they wanted the big tank feel, not the tank feel, but a bigger car than the Tornado came up. And I think that's why people will really love the 94, the replacement for the Tornado. It's a 4-door only. And,
is it?
yes. Yeah, and it's a slick-looking car. It's really neat.
No, that'd be a real departure for the Tornado.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yep. It's going to have a new name, too. It won't be called a Tornado. Yeah.
So that name should disappear.
Yeah.
How about, back up a little bit, Otto, how about the little F-85 of 6123? Were you involved with any part of that at all?
Yes. Because again, that was kind of a unique car because a lot of aluminum was used on it, including the engine. We used a lot of body panels that were made out of aluminum also. And I'm trying to remember, wasn't it called the F-85?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I remember
it was a unitized body attached.
The first. Yes, yes. And there again, you see, I worked in this area a lot, both in the chassis and the body area. The ride structure considerations were completely different with that car because here's all of a sudden an integral frame. You don't have body mounts to soften the impacts, and so you have to do a lot more with the suspension bushings or the shock absorbers or the springs or engine mounts. It was a different ballgame altogether. It was another fun project. It was different completely.
Did we try then with that vehicle to keep the old Oldsmobile ride?
Yes, we did. Much harder to do though, much harder without the separate frame. But now all cars are that way today. And you come up with, in fact, the 98 that we have right today, the 1992 98 is probably the best car I've ever ridden or driven because it has all the power, it's quiet, it rides soft, it's beautiful, it handles bumps, it doesn't shake. All the adjectives that they wanted in the old cars are
That's how we got it.
we finally got there in 1992. It's the finest car that there is, and they'll only get better. I don't know how they can get better, but because it's just almost a perfect car right now.
That's interesting.
What made me say that? I was thinking of something else.
We were talking about the F-85.
Oh yeah, F-85. You remember it? Maybe you don't, but Ed Rossetti was in charge of the water injection program.
Oh, the J2, or not J2, the Jetfire.
Jetfire, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
That was an exciting program for Ed Rossetti to be involved with that. He had nothing but troubles with that water injection stuff. And finally, again, like on the air ride, we, under special policy, would replace the Jetfire water injection stuff for anybody that brought the car in.
With a regular carburetor.
Yeah. It was a real problem, but really went when it was working right. It was a fun car. That car also had at one stage in its, I remember this because of the water separation problem, it had a unique, maybe it was a Jetfire, but it had a unique plastic hood, fiberglass.
Oh.
And there was an air intake on top of it.
You're thinking of the 442, are you?
I am. It was a 442 because it had even the outside exterior locks on it.
Yeah, that was a fiberglass hood.
Yes.
I remember.
we had real problems with water separation there. We wanted all that massive air to get into the
Oh, yeah.
the air cleaner,
That's right.
but
How'd you keep the water out?
well, it was a labyrinth thing, and we
Because
finally
it all
worked.
had to kind of somehow get.
Yes, yes. In fact, it had to do a couple 180s in order to get to the
Oh, yeah.
carburetor. Uh,
I wouldn't even thought about that, but I guess that's right. You really scoop up a whole lot of air.
oh, yeah, and water. Another program that, again, back in the safety standards area, we had to run hoods by at 100 miles per hour to a truck that's opposing us going in the opposite direction. You know, you get this big whoosh of air. And right when that happens, you were supposed to pull the hood latch, and the secondary latch was supposed to hold that load so that it wouldn't come back over the car. Well, the early tests, we didn't know all that we should have known about that. And Lou Mitchell and I at the proving ground ran many of those tests, and unfortunately, a lot of them came over the
Went over the top.
went over the top.
That would be surprising.
Yes. Well, some of the we came up at that time with some of the design criteria. It was something like 2.5 times the load of the opposing truck put on that hood configuration. You had to design the secondary to hold it, and I think they're probably still using that criteria today. But again, we didn't have the sophisticated computers or the stuff to finite element analysis would have been simple on something like that, but we didn't have it at that time. And so a lot of that was trial and error. And that's what took the long time to develop a car at that time, to really make it safe and good. And because you did a lot of seat of the pants stuff that you don't have to do today. But you remember some of those things just because they were unique or kind of scary, or
Well, I can imagine the hood going over the car probably scared the pants off people.
yes, it did. We had to wear helmets, and we had to close down the high-speed path or the track out there to run the test. And a lot of times it didn't fly off; it just kind of went over the top of it.
Yeah, pulled it over the.
But a lot of times we passed the test too, of course.
Oh, sure, you had eventually.
Yeah. But those were some of the things I recollect. The last 5 years, right now, I transferred from engineering to service, and I now manage a department called Product Service Engineering, and that's been a real challenge to me. Always being an engineer, you're in on the innovation, the design, the creation of stuff, and in the service department, you find it much different. My engineering experience helped a great deal technically to understand what was going on, but in the service department, you're fixing problems that customer perceive as problems. Some are real problems, and others are perceived to be problems, and you still have to resolve them to their satisfaction. I found it to be a challenging job. We at Oldsmobile, in our 3,100 dealerships around the United States, have something like 18,000 technicians that work on our cars. Yeah.
18.
Yeah, and some of those, unfortunately, are still blacksmiths, and other guys work with computers or CAMS systems to diagnose engines. And right now, our engines are very complex, very tough to diagnose without sophisticated tools, and that's where our challenge still exists to get all of our technicians, these 18,000 that I mentioned. They don't all have to be that top-notch qualified, but drivability right now on our cars with the computers and the sophistication of the engine is the biggest problem we have, trying to fix them in the field when they're bad.
Probably true. There's probably some of those guys that really don't have any interest in bringing themselves up to current standards.
No, and they're the old blacksmiths, the welders, the guys that
shade tree mechanics.
Yeah, exactly.
Like me.
Well, a lot of us are that way, but fortunately, we're getting them trained. Most of them want to get trained. They know the new era of their future lies with them getting trained to understand computers, to fix computers, to, everything you touch in the car has a computer chip behind it now. And
do the dealerships basically feel comfortable with that, doing that sort of thing nowadays? Or is
When
the
you say
management-
nowadays, no, because right now they're a lot of them are in financial difficulty. So
Okay,
they don't tend or want to send their technicians
Yeah.
off to a school that they
Yeah.
have to pay for. And they even lose his productivity
gone.
while he's gone.
yeah,
So it's a tough time right now. When the times are better, they're more easily convinced that they should train their technicians, and we're constantly pushing them to. In fact, we even have now what we call minimum training standards for each dealer. If
Okay.
you're a certain size A dealer, depending on your sales, you're either A, B, C, or D, and we have criteria now that tells them how many of each category technicians they must have that are trained in the things that we say that they need to be trained in. If you take your car into any Oldsmobile dealership with a transmission problem, for instance, you should have a transmission guy in that
yeah.
store that is capable of fixing your transmission. Or exactly, even a small dealership. Now, maybe this is one guy in some dealerships or two guys in some dealerships because they're that small, but that guy then has to know transmissions and HVAC controls or
everything, maybe.
or brakes. But there lies a problem in that the cars are so complicated now with respect to electronics that this guy that used to be able to change a spark plug and stuff like that doesn't know where to start with our new electronics in our automobiles. And so we have to train them. We have to make our field force go out and convince these smaller stores that they need to get their guys trained. The big stores usually have a one or two, or depending on the size again, transmission guys. They'll have suspension guys. They'll have drivability guys. They'll have HVAC guys that are experts, and they don't have to worry about the
business, apparently.
Yes.
Do we still have our technical people that can go out in the field and resolve those kinds of issues?
We do indeed. We call them field service engineers,
Okay.
and we have either one or two of them in each of the zones that Oldsmobile has, and we use them a lot. And they rely on my people again back here to help resolve those problems. They may get to a place where they don't know what's going on, or they can send us back a picture or even a computer readout on what the car is doing, and my guys can then take a look at that and help advise this guy out in Podunk, South Dakota, what to do, and
so he's really not out there with the wolves. He's got the factory to back.
oh yeah, no question about that. But we also expect, besides these field service engineers, to have our what we call district managers service. There's about 100 districts around the United States, depending on the size again, but they handle warranty things, comebacks, claims, all kinds of stuff that kind of administrative in nature, but we are expecting them to be more technically able also to help resolve some of these, because in a zone that typically has 100 dealers, this field service engineer, one or two guys,
He's a busy person.
he's going to be a busy person, and that's why we expect our district managers to evolve and get more training, and it's part of their key elements now that they be trained in the
Interesting.
so we're getting smarter, better trained, and it's taken a long while, but I think maybe Oldsmobile is at the forefront of that. We're not unique in not having these electronically trained technicians, but I think we're getting there faster than the other divisions, just because the push is here at the home office and in the field to make it happen.
How do we handle the ones where we're dueled with other guys, and like Chevrolet Olds and Pontiac Olds and that sort of thing?
Well, if they work on an Olds, we have what we call a technical assistance system. They can call in. I've got 10 guys that do nothing but answer telephone calls from dealerships on difficult to resolve problems. They don't know how to fix this car.
Yeah.
Half of those guys are drivability, by the way.
Okay.
Another one might be all chassis parts, suspension. Another one might be HVAC. Another one might be computers. But 5 of them are drivability.
My car stumbles.
Yes, exactly. Or doesn't start right away or whatever. they have that capability to call in on an 800 line to our section and we try to resolve it. It's difficult to resolve those kind of problems over the telephone, however.
Yeah, I
And
think so.
you're expecting a guy that may not know how to use a volt-ohm-meter is working on this car, and you're trying to explain to him what to do. What kind of voltage reading did you get, or what was the setting? What did it say it was?
What is a voltage?
Yes, you get that sometimes. But you have to work through that, and with the computer programs we have, they help to resolve these problems. We get 1,000 calls a month from dealerships.
Is this part of the ODAC thing?
No,
That's a separate thing.
yeah.
Okay.
ODAC is telemarketing, but
Okay.
this is a separate thing.
This is entirely independent of
Yep.
that.
I've always enjoyed engineering, but like I said initially, the service challenge has been neat and different from a different aspect.
Has it, that word maybe, enlightened you at all?
Yes, yes,
Issues engineers sometimes don't think about?
yes. A while back, we started, in fact, that's been canceled now, but we had a program where engineers would spend a 2-year program in service and then another in manufacturing, and then go back
Sure.
to engineering because they'd be better knowledgeable of what really goes on in the other world. Yeah, it has enlightened me, and I wish we could get back to having that program where we train engineers in the service department. What is happening though is that because of the 4-phase process,
Which is?
a planned progression of series of events from birth of the car to the demise of the car.
Okay.
It doesn't allow, for instance, engineering changes in the last year before you start production.
Okay.
Needed badly, in the old days, you'd make them right up to 2 weeks before.
Day before. I
Yeah.
Almost alive.
Yeah, yes. Well, with that process, it doesn't allow for these changes to occur. It has to be a wanton safety thing to make a change in that last year. And with this program in mind,
This is the last year prior to production.
yes, you're going to end up with better automobiles. Won't have those late engineering changes that.
And the big surprises sometimes you have.
Yeah. I forgot what point it works, but it isn't fully implemented yet in all car programs at all car divisions. It's that new. Even the new Achieva, while it worked through the process, it didn't start out when the Achieva started with a 4-phase. I think the first one that will hit that is maybe the Seville that just went in at Cadillac, went through a complete process like that. All future programs will and are in that process right now.
What are the rest of the phases? I don't know, other than the first couple, and what happens after that?
Well, the first one is concept approval, and you have to go through some gates before you can move on to the next part of it, or even to the next phase, and have approval in that concept approval. The second one, that's 0 phase. Phase 1, you do the styling and design of the car. And phase 2, then you do the detail of working out the ride, the handling, the feel of the car, and some of the details. And phase 3 then is working.
Phase 4.
No, it starts with 0, 1, 2, 3. I don't know why they started with 0, 1, 2, 3, but they did, rather than 1, 2, 3, 4. And 3 is the whole process of the pilot, the pre-prototype, the manufacturing. But the point I'm making is that it no longer waits till phase 3. The manufacturing guys, the service guys are back in the process on the team on phase 0. There are no there are no surprises in phase 3. That's going through the motions of the pilot and all the things that you remember that were so bloodshedding there at times. But that doesn't happen anymore because the service guys are there. They know they can get their
Yeah, get this thing out.
injectors out, they can get, do whatever they have to. You guys in manufacturing know that you can manufacture it.
Yep.
You've been there, and, and again, it's important because you don't move on through the phase until you get approvals, and you don't move to the next phase until this whole thing has been accomplished the way it's supposed to be
So
accomplished.
you basically resolve those upfront problems, hopefully, in that phase as you move, as you chug along.
Yeah, no surprises. It's not a concept, it's a working, proven, way to do the business now. And my whole point in bringing that up is that, I keep repeating this, but, we didn't have the team effort, we didn't have the communication at a phase of 0, for instance, or in one that we should have had between manufacturing, between service, between even financial. But all those people now are part of the team right through the completion of the car. Interesting thing, and it really works, and it's so basic, so simple that why didn't we do it forever, But I'm running out.
That's okay. You're not really. A question or two when you get. Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed my service challenge. That's what I
Yeah.
started this whole thing out. It's only been 5 years, and now I'm retiring, but it's been enlightening. I've learned a lot, and like I said before, I'm pushing to when all this dust settles that they start that program again where service and manufacturing and engineering guys can change. Now, a lot of that is happening, as you well know, that the engineering isn't its own little island now. They have guys out in the plant, and you guys are in there, and serviceability guys are in there from the service department. So it isn't as if it isn't happening to some degree even now, even though they're not fully implemented on the 4-phase process.
Yeah.
What other questions might you have?
Tell me about how you see over that period of time the changes in the organizational structure. Now, we used to be Oldsmobile, and then in the 80s we turned to.
See, I've always been Oldsmobile.
Turned into something else, and we turned into something. Did you? Yeah, and I recognize you kind of stayed on the Oldsmobile side of the house.
Always, yes. Now, obviously, I've seen the differences, though.
Yeah.
Because the thing that the change that Roger Smith implemented, and I'm not saying it wasn't a good implementation to do, but when that occurred, for instance, at Lansing Product Engineering, and I'm sure it happened in Lansing Manufacturing as well, people all of a sudden didn't have the loyalty or the vested interest in Oldsmobile, because this guy that used to be designing Oldsmobile grills now designed a Pontiac grill and a Buick grill and even a Chevrolet grill, and that was almost foreign to him. At first, it was, well, they didn't even want to work on these other car lines because they were Oldsmobile. I designed Oldsmobile grills, so it was a big transition to get the old Oldsmobile people. And Jim, you were part of this too. We at Oldsmobile here in Lansing were kind of away from the big stores down there in Detroit, the Pontiacs and the Chevrolets, and we kind of were a family-oriented thing. You know that the golf leagues, some of our people played on your golf leagues and vice versa, and it was fun. We socialized together, and when the transition occurred, though, that kind of thing kind of stopped. I'm sure there's still golf leagues and all that kind of stuff, but there isn't that loyalty, that vested interest in Oldsmobile that used to exist here on the Lansing campus, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that is necessarily bad. It's just that I lived through that, and I liked it like it was before, but I was able to work with a new regime. There's no problem doing that. It's just that you're not as folksy or whatever you want to call it with respect to the way the old Oldsmobile used to be. On the other hand, the old Oldsmobile by itself wasn't as sophisticated as the guys are today. The young ladies and men coming out of colleges are much smarter than they were when we graduated. They know computers. I didn't even know how to run a computer. I'd never seen one when I graduated from high school or from college. I took some courses after that, obviously, so I'm computer literate. You have to be today.
Sure.
But the folks that graduate today are better engineers than you and I were. I think one transition that I was a part of that I really liked, one of the first women engineers worked for me and was hired.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that was Sue Moore. I don't know if you
I
know that
remember
name.
her, sure.
Well, she was the first one hired, and it's kind of interesting. Um, Bob Dorschman was the chief engineer at that time, and at the time that she was hired, I was an assistant experimental engineer,
Mhm.
and she was going to go on a test trip. This was a first. You know, no woman had ever been on a test trip before, and Bob Dorschman didn't see any problem with that occurring, but he was afraid that there was going to be a backlash from the guys' wives who were on the trip,
Oh, no.
and I, as her boss, had to talk to her and to the trip master. Now, it seems silly today,
Right.
but I had to tell them from direction from Dorschmer, no hanky pank. This is a first of a kind. Don't screw up. Stay straight arrow all the way. And you know, I think back on it today, I must have sounded like a dumb fool, but that was
Like a father.
the era that we lived in at that time. Sue is now gone on to bigger and better things, and I think that's a gratifying thing that we have so many good young female engineers. And another one that I remember vividly was one of the first ones around was Lori Suchuk. Yeah, she was an electronics double E, and she did with the Japanese, I think it was Yusaki, the first electronic cluster that we ever had at Oldsmobile.
Otto A. Kern of 180 Cinnabar, Williamston, Michigan 48895. The recording was made on April 28, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing, Michigan. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes.
Well, the Japanese would come over here and they just couldn't fathom a woman engineer doing this stuff. It was just a different era for them. Their women sat home and took care of babies or something,
Yeah,
and here was
yeah.
this neat female engineer telling them stuff in electronic terminology and
How
doing
did
it.
that work?
Yes,
Didn't,
it worked real well. They went away amazed. Uh, Same thing occurred with Americans. The Chevrolet guys would come down and John Dodge was in charge of the check chassis at that time, and she'd be showing him something, and John would come back later on. He said, "Those Chevrolet guys that tried to screw her up so many times, but she just straight arrowed everything and knew what she was talking about, and just did an excellent job." We used her many times for recruiting. She would go out. Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. She would go out to some of these predominantly girls' schools and uh, tell them what an engineer does, because frankly, they had a stereotype in their minds of a woman with a shop coat on and her hair in curlers and grease under her fingernails. Well, Lori Sobchak was a very attractive woman, beautiful nails, you know, and it was just, she'd come back and tell some of these stories about how the girls were almost aghast that, are you really an engineer? You know, you don't look like an engineer, you know. And unfortunately, a lot of girls in high school, their counselors, maybe because they were good in math, said, "Gee, you ought to be an engineer," and they didn't even know what an engineer was. You know, you probably experienced that in your recruiting stuff. You know, but Lori and Sue Moore and some of the other young ladies, and I don't even refer to them as females because they were just real good engineers. They weren't good female engineers; they were good engineers. You know, and we were lucky, maybe at Oldsmobile, as to who we selected or hired, but we were fortunate to get some really good engineers and good people.
How did the, what I'll call the old timers feel about that in our organization? Did you see anything there that's,
Yeah, there were some problems sometimes with certain individuals. Dumb things happen. This is maybe not the neatest thing to tell, but Sue Moore later on was assigned to the proving grounds, and some of the technicians out at the grounds, she was in charge of the special test area,
Okay.
and they would put mirrors in the floor for Sue to walk up to so that they could wash her underpants or something, and
Yeah.
dumb stuff like that. We had
Silly.
all kinds of union debacles out there just because of that, and whistles and catcalls. And again, you got to remember, it was a different era. It wasn't what it was today. But I'll tell you, we had to really get tough with some people about some of the things that they would say, or the whistles, or catcalls, or even the pictures in their locker. You know, everybody had a picture up. Yep. But these ladies, that's why I say we were fortunate.
Yeah.
They not only were good engineers, but they were principled people, and they weren't upset by some of these things.
They take that kind of baloney.
Well, they shouldn't have had to, but they were able to. Yes, yes.
To their credit.
Yeah.
So.
And nowadays, of course, and you mentioned the old timers. There were problems sometimes too with the old draftsman that had been there for 100 years, you know, doing his thing with the males, and all of a sudden this woman is coming over telling me where to put that line, you know, and we had some problems with that. But again, they even won over some of these old timers just because they were capable young engineers that were able to understand and get by those kinds of situations.
But that was new ground. We were plowing new ground.
Oh yeah, no question. It was important ground to plow, but now you think back, why didn't it happen sooner? What, you know, it's so simplistic today. Well, it isn't easy today either, but I'm just saying it's a lot easier than it was then. That first stupid trip, you know, I had to talk to the people. Nothing happened. The women weren't concerned, you know, and Tom Lay's wife, what the heck's her name? Sue. Can't think of it now. Anyway, she was in charge of one of our test trips after that to New York City. Just did a splendid job. And again, fortunate to have good people. But as you know now, they're in all facets of our business, like they should be, and
they're just as capable. So.
Yep, fun to work with, and
with a little different perspective on occasion. So.
Yep. Yeah.
How about the unique products, Otto, that came out? We talked a little bit about Toros and F-85s. I think about the Aerotech. Did you get close to that perchance?
Well, I was only close to it because at that time I was working for Ted Lucas, and I had the product assurance department at that time in engineering, and Jim Dawson handled the engineering aspects of it. So I was very close to it because you're in joint meetings and you learn a lot by osmosis just by sitting there. That was for Jim Dawson a very exciting program. You can imagine it was several $1 million and all kinds of unique new things. Foils on the underside of cars that held the car to the track, and all kinds of unique things that they had to come up with. It's like doing another Tornado because it's just like a new car, and they only built 4 of them or some number like that.
You know what precipitated how it got started?
It all got started to show what a great engine our Quad 4 engine was.
Oh, really? It was driven off the Quad 4?
Oh, yes, it was. Very definitely. And of course, it broke 2 different speed records, and still holds those records, I think. But just building those cars to break those records so that you could exploit the advertising, and that's was the whole thrust of it. There again, some background. We wanted that Quad 4 to be a great seller, but our Oldsmobiles owners weren't used to 4-cylinder cars. They were used to 8 cylinders, and we're going back to that, by the way. That the new Tornado will be an 8-cylinder car.
Will it?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, our Oldsmobile owners weren't ready for that, and we had to make that engine a good engine, a high performance engine, quality engine, and all that kind of good stuff. And the advertising was important to get that perception that it was. It is a good engine. It's not just a perception, but you have to sell that perception to the customer. And that was the whole point of doing those cars, to break the records with a four-cylinder. And
Did we do the design work on the vehicle ourselves, or where was that all done? 'Cause we didn't have much of an engineer, I mean, the Oldsmobile side didn't have much of an engineering force at that point.
no, it was styled by design staff. Creative Universal did most of the building of the cars. An engine concern in Ann Arbor. I want to say Intel, but it may not have been them, but did most of the engine development work.
Okay.
Because while it was a quad four, it didn't end up being much quad four, you know, when they finally got it moving and working right. And A.J. Foyt drove the car, by the way.
Yeah, I remember that in the picture we got in the back room.
Yeah. Well, for Jim Dawson, that was an exciting. Have you interviewed Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He probably told you a lot about that, because that was his baby, and it was a fun project for him to be on. And we still talk about that on times. We both at that time worked for Ted Lucas,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was a fun program to be involved with. It went over budget badly.
Well, what's new?
But those kind of projects, I've been mentioning to you, made my job so much fun, because there were always challenges to do new things and to develop or create something new and different. And some of it was by necessity, but others you evolved into them and made some significant improvements or suggestions or design changes. Again, I'm repeating myself, but Jim, I think you enjoyed your job. I enjoyed my job tremendously, and I still do. And that's what makes working for Oldsmobile General Motors so important to me, because it's my part of my life, a big part of my life. We spend more time with each other than we do with our families, as you well know. And and I, again, repeating myself, it's too bad that all people don't enjoy their jobs, and you know, we'd have a better world, but for whatever reason, people are different. And but it's been a fun time for me.
How about, Otto, when we switched from once again, back at reorganization, and Oldsmobile then took on the relatively small engineering staff,
Yes,
and then somebody else is designing all the cars for us.
yes.
How did we tell those guys what it was we wanted, so to speak?
Well, that's just exactly what our engineering department at Oldsmobile did. They worked with the platforms, and you know, there's
Because
four
it's a
different
lot different
platforms.
than it used to be.
Oh yes, much
Yeah.
different. They are down there designing the things on the computers or any otherwise. They're working, however, with the platform people, whether it be Lansing or Cadillac or CPC or the powertrain platform or whomever. Each of the engineers that worked for Larry Lyons, that was Ted Lucas,
Yeah.
work with these people at the different platforms and say, hey, they work together on formulating a plan, and the phase zero, whether it's going to be a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder or what kind of how many doors it's going to have and all that kind of stuff. And then totally work with the platform. That those guys have that responsibility, those people, because a lot of them are females now.
Guys, it's generic.
Yes.
Were they responsive to our needs?
Yes and no. And I say yes and no. Most of the platforms were and are, but truck and bus is one of the, if I want to use that cliche, one of the worst ones to work with. They are truck builders, and trucks are, over the years, have been very functionally designed, and they don't have all the gadgets and stuff on it. So it's taken us, for instance, on the Silhouette, 2 years to get a 6-way seat adjuster. They just didn't think
who needs that?
The truck needs a 6-way seat adjuster. The Bravada, it had to go to the general manager's level to get fog lights on the front of the Bravada. You know, our Mr. Losh thought that, and Bill Lane thought that it should have fog lights, and well, the Jimmy and the Blazer never had fog lights, you know?
So they don't exist.
That's right. And so it was a constant struggle. And they're coming around now too because they're having to compete with the Jeeps and the Cherokees as well with their Blazers and Jimmys. And so they need this gimmickry, if you want to call it that, much like we do. Surprisingly, for a long time, we had a closer relationship with the Flint platform and the Cadillac platform than we did with the Lansing platform.
Oh, really?
And
That's interesting.
yeah, it is kind of different. We would have thought just the opposite, but they had such an influx of new people, different people that locally in Lansing, when they combined that thing, the Fisher people, some of them worked down in Detroit, some of them were here, and it was a mess for a while there. But now the relationship is different, and we are closest with the Lansing platform just because of location and the Achieva came off so well because of the working together of all the departments that and the start of production was good quality, and it's going to be interesting now with the reorganization because there's no CPC, and we'll still be working with these other platforms. But Chevrolet will be reporting to Mr. Losh, just like Pontiac is reporting to Mr. Losh, and like our Mr. Rock will be reporting to Mr. Losh. And so I think it'll be good for Oldsmobile per se, because try as hard as they can. CPC were very cliquish with respect to Chevrolet. They'd work on Oldsmobile problems when they got done with Chevrolet problems, and
that's what I was wondering, if that didn't exist.
It did, no question about it.
Sorry about that.
But we're getting much better at that, just because of, in some cases, personalities that make it happen.
People.
The new reorganization, I think, is going to be good for all of us. It's a step in the right direction. It's kind of interesting. Mr. Losh now, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinion, has more responsibility than Lloyd Royce has when he got demoted.
Yeah, well, of course I do.
Well, he's got all the car divisions. He's got STG, the Service Technology Group.
Okay.
He's got SPO, the Service Parts Operation, and that's more than Mr. Royce had.
Now the Lansing Automotive Division still is off here all by itself, so to speak, as part of BOC.
Yeah, not as part of BOC.
Because BOC went away.
Yes, because BOC went away, and so did CPC.
But now, where does the Automotive Division side of the house?
All the automotive platforms report to Mueller.
Oh, they go to Mueller now.
Yep.
Okay.
And they have a comparable guy, don't know his first name, Vaughn, that has all of the truck platforms.
Okay.
And so Tom Davis, Lansing, reports to Mutchler. John Grettenberger, on the other hand, reports to Mr. Losh. That's about all I have. What else? Okay.
Don't mind me asking a question.
Not at all.
And I think maybe this is a hard one to answer, but perhaps you can give me some insight on it. Oldsmobile traditionally has been what I will call reasonably high volume place. We've made a lot of cars over the years, had million car years. Somehow in 84, 5, and 6, after we got over those last million car years, we sort of just kind of petered on lower and lower. We're down to 500,000 cars or something.
Yep.
Can you shed any light on that occurrence?
Yeah, I think so. And this may not be the answer that everybody would give you, but I think two things occurred. During the time of making 1 million cars a year, those million per year weren't very good cars from a quality standpoint.
Okay.
They performed, they went 100 miles per hour, and they did all that kind of stuff, but things broke. Trim faded, things happened that soured people on on Oldsmobile, soured people on American cars in general. We
really?
lost some
Okay.
real good, loyal, longtime customers because of those years when we built millions, we built bad cars, and the dealers took advantage of the customers. They were fixing them and making all kinds of money. And people now tell us that they'd rather go to a dentist than to go to their car dealer, you know, because
That's
they get,
terrible.
yes, it is terrible. And that's a situation that we're trying to turn around to make the dealers customer oriented, and you hear all the magic words, customer satisfaction, but they're really working on doing that now, training the people in the dealerships.
So
Where'd I get off?
You think we lost it then because of the level of quality in the 80s and in the 70s?
Okay, but one other thing occurred almost simultaneously with that. We brought out, that was a little later really, we brought out some cars that our people at Oldsmobile thought were neat cars, but the cars at Pontiac and some of them at Buick and some of them at Toyota looked better, but were perceived to be modern and new and not boxy and had rounded corners. We were longer in turning that around. Now, right now, we have all new shapes, and we're pretty modern and good looking and all that, but we weren't just a few years ago. So there's two big stumbling blocks, in my opinion, that brought the a million years down to the 400,000 that we had. Is the quality when we were making the million, and the kind of cars that we were trying to sell right after that. They had two strikes against them. They didn't look as good as the competition in some areas. No, we had good looking cars in some areas, but not all of the lines. And the quality stigma stuck with us. Now, right now, we have good looking cars, and we're waiting right now for the June J.D. Power survey information to come out. We think that our Cutlass Sierra out of the Oklahoma City plant will be the best domestic car, like the Buick LeSabre was last year. And we're going to advertise the dickens out of that.
I could never figure that out because the LeSabre and the 88 are made on the same line. How come they don't come out the same?
There's a good reason for that, and that's part of the quality concept. The Buicks were easier to build in the assembly plant. And let me give you an example. The bumper up strip on a Buick ran from the wheelhouse opening on the fender, around the bumper, and over to this in one piece.
Okay.
On the Oldsmobile, you had a piece over here, you had a piece over here, and one on the bumper, and they had to line up, fit. They didn't always do this or that. You didn't have to worry on a Buick. It just did its thing all the way around. There are instance after instance where those kind of designs hurt our buildability in the plant. It's simpler to build if you just push it on and it's all lined up, rather than all the funny stuff that we had.
So there was a difference actually between the vehicles enough to cause that.
Oh, yes, no question.
I thought maybe it was just quote media at work again.
No, it is. That was real. The thing gets even deeper than that when you have to send this car that's misaligned to the repair hole. Somebody may fix it, and while he's fixing that, he may scratch it, or he get his belt buckle, or screw up something else, and it just exploded almost to the point where. But now we've turned that around. We've got good designs. We've got good-looking cars. We build better than most cars right now, quicker and more easily, and that's a important thing in the assembly plant, to build a quality car. And so you don't get it in the repair hole, so you don't have to repair it.
Fix it at the dealer twice to try and get it right.
But those two items needed to be turned around, and like I started to say before I answered your question, that may not be everybody's answer, but those are two important ones.
Thought, because it's kind of, I think 20 years from now, somebody's going to stand here and wonder what the devil happened. Because there's an obvious big blurb in the volume levels.
Yes.
Somebody's going to hang out.
And we're going to turn around. And if, telling a long story here, but last year, our Cutlass Sierra out of the Oklahoma plant was the best domestic car in the United States, including the LeSabre. But at that same time, last year, we were also building that A car in the St. Therese plant
Oh, yeah.
in Canada. So the A car had to be averaged between the two plants. And so the Sierra didn't turn out to be the best car in the United States like the Sabre did because of that averaging. This year, we're not building in St. Therese. Yes, they're building F cars up there. And our Sierra, we think, is going to be the best. We think that our H car, our 88, is going to be right up there close to it.
Good.
They're building a great car in Flint and at Wentzville. That, we're going to advertise the tickets out of it when that happens. As I mentioned, what happens then is that you get the mystique of the car rolling like it has for Buick. And even though they had only one car, the inference is that all Buicks are that way. And we're going to say the same thing. The inference is that all Oldsmobiles are that way. And truthfully, I can tell you that our cars are all much, much better. We've never built better cars than we're building today. Bar any time of our history, whether you're talking about the old 55s or the million-year cars or whatever, these are the best we've ever built in every car line that we have. And I can say that without any doubt in my mind. I know I have the facts. But it doesn't matter if the people don't think it's.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Perception.
And that's why this JD Power thing is so important to us at Oldsmobile right now. And we're just anxiously awaiting that.
Did the look-alike thing have any effect on all this? I
Oh,
keep reading about that.
Well, you read about it, but it had less to do with it than the quality of the car. Now, there's a big thing occurring now in the corporation. You know that we're not going to have the 93 Tornado. We're not going to have the 93 Custom Cruiser as well. Down the road, and not too far down the road, the thinking is, Jim, that maybe Oldsmobile, maybe Buick, maybe not Cadillac, but certainly Chevrolet and Pontiac wouldn't be all things to all people.
Back to our traditional role.
Yes, exactly.
Bad word, maybe, but.
Well, no, that's a good word, and maybe it's not called that per se, but just maybe Buick would be the 98 or the C car and the A car maybe, and Oldsmobile would be the H car and the N car, the Achiever or something like that. And we wouldn't all try to do a model off in every one. You mentioned the lookalike, and there were some people that got turned off about the lookalike. They can buy a Chevrolet that costs a lot less. Yep. But I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that kind of thing in the future. Stempel spoke of that often when he was head of the BOC, and I think he was striving for it, but I think he now is going to make it happen faster than it was happening before.
I personally felt that was a big problem because I don't know how we did it, but in the 50s and 60s, even though we shared similar bodies, somehow we all looked different.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
How about the engine relationship, Otto? Any feelings on that, or whether the engine is, quote, an Oldsmobile engine or a Pontiac? Now we use generic engines, and the engine thing isn't there anymore.
No, I don't think it is there anymore.
Is that an issue in all that at all? Or?
No, I don't think so. They are certainly, Mr. Royce was pushing it strongly. They're going to get down to 4 families or some number like that instead of with the whole range that we have now. There'll be specialties off in those 4 base engines, but we won't have all the different blocks and stuff that we have today. But the engine thing is almost a given now. People expect it to start, not stall, perform well, and they don't care what kind of an engine it is. That people used to. They worried about a rocket engine.
Yeah, it was a wonderful.
We had the big lawsuit about that,
Sure, but it was a marvelous sales tool.
Yep, it was.
Sold a lot of cars.
But today,
you don't judge that as an issue.
No, it's a given that you have to have all that stuff. It just happens, and people say it's got an engine in it, and that's about all. Oh, they still talk horsepower and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. Wait till you see that 94 Toro replacement with the V8 engine in. Boy, it's a sleek car. It moves. North Star, yeah. Yeah. They will have it for 1 year, and then we have 94.
How about, Otto, and this is an entirely different subject, managers, general managers, you dealt with them over the years. Can you share with me some of the management styles, contrast management styles, or whatever you want to call them?
Well, my favorite has to be John Belts
Okay,
as chief engineer and as general
all
manager.
right,
He had an aura about him that he could talk to the guy on the assembly line. He could make a presentation to the heads of the corporation and
okay,
be equally as effective and spoke on his feet freely and easily on any subject practically.
okay.
Not a braggart, but and I don't want to say a common man either because he certainly wasn't common, but he maybe is the guy that turned the corner, if you want to call it a modern general manager.
Okay,
Wolfram and Metzel were his predecessors, but Belts took us into the modern era. And of course, Sanchez wasn't around long. Bob Cook is almost like an old shoe. He's a good friend. I like him. Again, a different kind of management style. He wasn't as flamboyant as a Belts by any means, but and he was timely. He came from the manufacturing side, as you well know. Up until that time, I think most of them had been engineers, but at that time, the industry, Oldsmobile included, needed an evolution in manufacturing and new designs and new configuration, new thoughts, and he was appropriate for the time and a good general manager. And he was fortunate to have lived through, as general manager, some very, very good years. And
but some really tough ones too.
oh yeah,
We had that oil crunch and all that schmozz.
yeah, no question. But he came through it in sparkling fashion. I talked to him, I don't know, a couple months ago. Maybe longer than that. He bought a new Starfire, not a new Starfire.
He stopped here with it.
Did he really? Well, we got him some service manuals from that year that he had, and he bought it at someplace out west.
Yeah, I don't know, or
Dudley's or something like that. He gave me a catalog on it.
okay.
Well, Bob Cook gave me this catalog from this place, and they had just kind of all kinds of configurations of these old cars that had been, some have been restored and others are original shape and good shape.
Yeah.
And that Starfire was certainly in good shape. But you don't even think about driving a Starfire up to your cottage anymore, but he did, you know.
I know.
I was telling him though that surprisingly, and he verified this too, out in Phoenix, you see a lot of that vintage of car because in Phoenix they don't rust and corrode. The weather, and they're still, well, you remember the four moldings and then the front that didn't seem to match the rear, you know. But you see a lot of them out there because the moldings are still bright and shiny and the paint is good because it's been protected. But that was a vintage car. I like that Starfire. But Bob was and is a total gentleman all the time. At least I perceived him to be that way. Not that John Belts wasn't, but John was just a different kind of guy. But he was still my favorite, I guess, as far as all-around management style or handling of people or doing innovative things or making the push to make it happen.
Let's see, was Howard Carroll in there someplace?
Yeah, he was in there someplace. He had a totally different style. You remember, Jim, that sometimes you might get the impression that Howard Carroll was a bit aloof just because of the way he carried himself or the way he spoke. He wasn't. He was I got to give you a little story about this. Howard Carroll. Tom Gerben, you know, Tom used to work for me in the body group, and Howard Carroll came out one day and decided, hey, we ought to have a different kind of hood pop-up spring. We've had those old coil springs for a year. let's come up with a torsion bar spring. And Tom said, well, I'll go home tonight and look up some of the formulas to design a torsion bar, that. And he says, no, you don't have to. So this Howard Carroll writes down the formula for computing the rate on a torsion spring. I don't know if he just looked it up, but he was a teacher at Notre Dame. Yeah. But he wrote down the formula for that torsion spring for Tom Griffin. He had some made up. It didn't work very well. There were all kinds of problems with torsion springs. The old pop-up still worked better, but I was very impressed with the fact that he could just write it out, and it wasn't wrong. It was right. Tom went home to check it, and it was right.
Interesting.
But he was carried himself different than Cook, and then John Belts, good engineer, very capable, but not quite the people person that either a Belts or Howard or Bob Cook would have been. And I think Bob Cook was maybe even a better people person than Belts was. But Belts, I guess if I had to put a list of favorites in all categories, he'd be my number one. I asked Helen Hoey that same question. Who were her favorite general managers? And she's seen a lot of them. And she, right off the bat, says John Belts and Bob Cook and my current boss, Mike Klosh. Those are the three. Now, she worked for a lot of different ones. Who was the first one? Probably Metzel. She worked for him.
She was not in that position, but she was in other positions working for other individuals.
Who was the first one that she worked for? Probably Belt.
Let's see, I think, I trying to remember Betty Gallinari, or Libby, was up there.
Yep, she was.
Before Helen, I think.
Well, anyway, those are the three that she picked out, regardless of whether she had worked for them or not. And I thought that was rather interesting. And you ought to get Helen over here, by the way. She's got a wealth of.
She's agreed to come over.
Yeah.
She's got to get her feet on the ground.
Ask her that question over the.
Oh, I will.
So
How about, let's see, after you mentioned Sanchez a little bit, he was here a relatively short period of time.
One of the interesting things, not interesting, just a occurrence that occurred. The first time I ever met Sanchez, it was out at the Desert Proving Ground, and we were going to ride some cars around the ride and handling loop, and it's all curves and all that. And I've never seen a car go around that ride road as fast as Sanchez put it through.
Really?
He actually hit the wheel on the pavement on a couple of turns.
Folded the tire right up?
Yes. Nobody could follow him. He said, great car. And he went on to something else. Oh, yeah. He was really driving mad. Not mad, he's just aggressive. But I never really, nobody really got to know him very well because of the short time he was here. But apparently he was very capable also.
So who followed him? Bill Lane? Did Bill Lane follow him?
Yes. Well, there was the guy from Canada.
Baker was in there, but he came after Carroll, didn't he?
Did he? Okay.
He was here a month or two.
Yep.
Probably. Did you even meet him?
No. Did you?
No. I think he was here at the plant 3 days, I've heard. Let's see. So,
Sanchez, and I think it was Bill Lane then.
Yeah, Bill Lane must have came in. Yeah. So then you must have worked with him.
Very well. He was a good friend. This was the new organization now, and Bill Lane was a salesman through and through. Good friend, and we thought a lot of him, but he was a backslapper, a jovial guy, and always selling Oldsmobiles. He again was fortunate because when he was here, we had million cars. Yes. And not to belittle him in any way, but Losh took his place, obviously. And Losh is an altogether different individual. In my opinion, much deeper, knowledge-wise and overall business-wise. Bill Lane was good for the job that he was supposed to do. He was supposed to be a salesman for Oldsmobile, and that's general manager, and that's what he did. He did a good job of it, too. And just a real nice person. pleasant to be around, and went out of his way to, like Bob Cook does, goes out of his way to say hello or shake a hand or whatever, you know. And, I remember him out the plant out to Kansas City. The plant's down now, but there was a guy by the name of Roger Smith there that worked on the assembly line, and he made a big deal about giving this Roger Smith one of the Oldsmobile caps or something, and he was a big black man, but Bill made a big deal out of it. I'll tell my boss that I met you out here in Kansas City, and you know, the guy ate it up and really enjoyed it, you know. But Bill was that kind of guy. He'd be very folksy, and he was liked by the dealers.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, now you say Lash is an entirely different sort of guy then,
Yeah.
and I don't really know much about him at all. I've never met him.
Well, he is more, how to properly put this? I was going to say more fundamental, but his knowledge in a lot of different areas, whether it be marketing or finance or sales or appearances of automobiles or how they should perform, I think was deeper and broader than Bill Lane's. And maybe that's why he just got this promotion too, because people have seen that in him. And like John Belts, he's very capable on his feet. He could speak to any kind of an organization or his bosses or his division, and he's done a lot of things to improve his one-on-one relationship with people. He has these roundtables, as you're probably aware of, where he'll get 8 or 9 or 10 people together. They know they're going to be invited. They have been invited. They can come with their gripes or comments, and he talks with them on a one-on-one basis, 8 or 9 people. And I don't know if he's covered everybody in the division yet, but he had been doing this since he started here, and so people got to know him better on even a first name basis like that. Instead of Mr. Losh, it was Mike if you saw him in the hall, you know. And that
Was that his? He created
mode of
that?
operation. Oh yeah, he did that, and he felt he needed to do that to get to know the people, to have their respect, to gain their support, the whole thing, you know. And it worked. Most of my people have been to one of those roundtables over the years, and they thought it was really neat. Never before had people on those levels felt as close to a general manager, because nobody had done that. And even you and I, we've never sat down with a Bob Cook with 8 or 9 of us. We knew Bob Cook very well, but to do that, it's almost as if you're a special group, you know, and it made people feel good. It really did.
Well, that's neat. That's a good approach. Did he do anything that pointed direction or anything that you can comment about, Otto?
Yeah, he very initially thought our interiors were old and dumpy, and they were. I don't know how they got that way, but they were dumpy, they were old, they didn't look fresh, they didn't look new. He made some big waves at design staff and got some good looking interiors in our automobiles that are go with the car, and they're not dumpy, they're not old, they're not folksy looking. And those aren't bad words necessarily, but they just weren't fresh, you know. And that's one of the biggest things he did. Bill Lane, of course, already had started the approval of the Silhouette and the Bravada. Mike Losh merely enhanced that development of those 2 cars, and those are good for Oldsmobile.
I don't think keep running off a different subject. How did those 2 come to pass? Did you have?
Our dealers really wanted to have, they wanted the Bravada. They could see, and so could Bill Lane, that people were moving out of station wagons and into vans because they were much more utilizable by families, by carrying whatever you want to carry, or luggage, or picnics, or going to the cottage, or whatever, you know. And that foresight proved to be very true. And you can see our wagons have died. And
the regular wagon.
yeah, because they aren't as utilitarian. That's the word I'm looking for. families can get into a Silhouette that couldn't get into our wagon comfortably with luggage and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a good move by Bill Lane to force that. Our dealers wanted that extra car.
Did they do you think the dealers actually precipitated that?
Yes, they did indeed. Their dealer councils got talking about these kind of things, and there were actually dealer input by our dealer council that said, "Hey, we need some vehicle like that. Go get it." And when we got the Bravada, the Jimmy and the Blazer got their first four-door vehicles, and they had been wanting that for years, and they were a little chagrined that we got it right off the bat. We don't have a two-door, of course,
Yeah,
but that was a good move for us to have that four-door. The Silhouette is a very popular car. In fact, my wife had one 2 years ago, and now she's got an Achieva. And now that I'm retiring, we're going to keep the Achieva, of course, but
sure.
we're going to buy another Silhouette just because we want to run back and forth to cottage or whatever.
Sure.
And, but those decisions were made, like you say, precipitated by the dealer organization.
As you look down the road then, Otto, will the dealers, quote, the big dealer organization for all General Motors have any input into this re-subdividing of?
Oh, sure they will. Sure they will. But a lot of us are talking about, oh, sure it will. But we can foresee down the road that there isn't an Oldsmobile sales guy or a Pontiac sales guy or a Cadillac sales guy. There'll be a General Motors guy out there saying, okay, dealer, you want 2 of these Pontiacs and you want 3 of these Oldsmobiles and 4 Buicks, and sure, we'll send them out. And it'll be that kind of, there's no need for 5 of us guys to be calling on the same dealership that has all 5 franchises, you know? Yeah.
All the items.
Or even if it's only 2 franchises, you know? And so that'll happen down the road, and I think it'll happen soon. Even in our service department, while, you know, your protection, your area, your turf, for instance, this technical assistance system I was telling you about where dealers call in, there's no reason that can't be a corporate group, and they can probably do it more efficiently, pick up all these groups from the different divisions, and it'll still be transparent to the dealer when he calls in. All he wants is an answer. He doesn't care if it's answered by a GM guy rather than an Olds guy, you know, and
since engines and all those are kind of the same anyway.
Yep. Well, anyway, those kinds of things are going to be happening in the very near future. It's not like 10 years away. This is a year or two, and those things are going to be happening with the new regime that we have. And it's good. It's going to make us tougher and leaner and more efficient. I'm going to be interesting to watch this occur. You know, you and I will be reading it from the newspapers.
Right.
That's right. And that's going to be a funny thing for me to experience too, because being in engineering and service and your job in manufacturing, you were in on some things early on that other people don't. Yeah. And now I'll read about it when it happens in the newspaper.
Or 2 days later.
Oh, 2 days later, yeah. Right. But I'm looking forward to it. I've had fun on my job, but I'm going to have fun in retirement too. And
you said you're retiring what? What's the date?
June 1st is the
June
official.
But you'll be gone all next month, sort of.
Yep, I will. In fact, next Monday, May 4th, is my last official day at work.
Okay.
And I don't look at that as a sad day. I think it's going to be a happy day. I'm looking forward to it. My wife is. We have her health, and really
a whole life, sort of.
Well, sort of. But we plan to keep doing the sort of things that we've been enjoying. We've been smelling the roses like you have over the years, and Oldsmobile and General Motors has paid us well. You realize that, and I do. It's allowed us to do some things that well, some of our peers haven't been able to, just because we work for General Motors and Oldsmobile. And it's still, to me, I'm proud to say that I work for Oldsmobile and General Motors. Some people seem to be squeamish about that, but I certainly am not. Enough.
Think we did?
I've carried on long enough. I really